Hi, everyone. I'm Diane.
Capriana again.
Yes, and we're here with Dose of Unity, and we're here with Michelle Kullmann, and she is here to talk about a more serious subject. We have had a podcast in the past relating to mental health and addiction, and this goes a step further and talks a little bit more about um, some tragedy. And we'd like to have Michelle share her story. And why don't you go ahead and just kind of give us kind of the overview of your situation, what had happened, and with your son, and
Sure.
yeah.
So my son, Cade Reddington, he passed away. It was 2 years ago on November 4th of 2021. And he died in his dorm room at UW Milwaukee after taking what he thought was a Percocet pill. And it turned out that it was a fake and it was 100% fentanyl. And it was a complete shock to me when I got the phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it turned out it was just a crazy set of circumstances. My brother was the one that ended up calling. He found out before I did. And he said, "Have you talked to anybody yet today?" And I said, "No." And thought something was wrong with my parents. And then he said, "Have you talked to Ross, who's my older son?" And I said, "No." And then my heart started racing. I'm like, "What's wrong with him?" And he said, "Cade OD'd last night." And I said, "What do you mean OD'd? Like dead OD'd?" And he said, "Yeah, he's gone." And I just started screaming, "No, that's not possible. Like he wouldn't there's nothing he was doing that would have killed him." Like I knew that he was smoking some weed and doing some drinking, and that concerned me, but like there was nothing that I knew of that he was doing that would have resulted in death. And it was unfathomable. I just said he knew better. There's no way that this could happen. So that just was the start of me just learning so much. It turns out that Kate had started dabbling in opioids, and I did not know this. I had been on vacation with him a month before he died. No, on October 4th, his brother was doing a semester in Washington, D.C., and we went out there to visit for a whole weekend. I had absolutely no sign of him doing any type of drugs. So this was just such a complete shock. Um, so he must have hit it well and was embarrassed, or maybe he just had really started down this path more once he got to UW Milwaukee and it was more easily accessible and he wasn't in my house. Um, so what happened then was that week after he passed, we were trying to figure out what happened and trying to put together the pieces from his friends, and found out that from his friends that he had sought out a Percocet. And so we were trying to wrap our heads around how you could die from just taking one Percocet, and that was when we started hearing about fentanyl. And this is before it takes a while to get the toxicology
Yeah.
report. So then, we started hearing more about this, and then my brother found this website from the DEA, and it was One Pill Can Kill. And they had just released, so Cade died on November 4th. On September 23rd, they issued a press release about One Pill Can Kill and about how these pills, anything that is on the street right now is fake. There's no real prescription pills on the street because they've tightened down on the prescriptions. So there's not these extras that drug dealers are getting a hold of. Everything is pressed as fake. And they're pressing these pills to look like Xanax, Adderall, even Percocets, ecstasy. So anything that is bought that is not prescribed has fentanyl in it. It's just a matter of how much fentanyl is in it, and is it enough to kill you, or is it enough just to get you strongly addicted? Because it's
Yes.
only 2 milligrams of fentanyl that can kill you, which is like a couple of grains of sand.
Sand. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So we found out about One Pill Can Kill, and then we did get the toxicology report back. Somehow we got it back a lot sooner than a lot of people do, and we found out that I expected there was going to be some oxycodone in it,
Mm-hmm.
but to hear that it was 100%
That's just
fentanyl,
crazy.
horrifying. So, and then what happened was, okay, so then we found out about one pill can kill, and then a week later was when the news story started hitting that there was 100,000 overdose deaths in the last year,
Oh my God.
and 70% of those are because of fentanyl.
Yeah.
But nobody was talking about this. And then what happened was about a couple weeks after Cade passed, I finally got it together to post on Facebook what had happened. And somebody had shared that, and then this woman who lives in Pewaukee saw my post, and she reached out to me because her son Logan died in his dorm room at UW Milwaukee 9 months prior. So we, once I heard about that, I was like, this is such a huge problem. Why is nobody talking about this?
Yeah.
And I was so mad. I'm like, how can there be 100,000 overdose deaths? How could there be another boy who died in his dorm room at UW Milwaukee and nobody knows about this?
Mm-hmm.
So her and I teamed up, and I mean, I was so angry that this is happening. And I think our country was so focused on COVID.
Yeah.
And whereas in the meantime, you've got this other epidemic that is happening, but
Mm-hmm.
because of the stigma around drug use,
Mm-hmm.
and the shame of, that a lot of people have from losing a loved one to this, there wasn't as much media attention
Mm-hmm.
on this. So I went ballistic
Yeah.
because I wanted every single person to know, is like, if this can happen to my son,
Right. Mm-hmm.
who's raised in a loving family, I didn't do any drugs, like it was just that none of this was on my radar. I mean,
Yeah.
I was afraid of heroin. Like I talked to him about that. I was like, whatever you do, you can never try heroin, you'll get addicted.
Mm-hmm.
Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. Who knew that you're supposed to warn your kids about fake pills? Nobody knew this.
Yeah.
So anyways, I started requesting meetings with Tommy Thompson, who was then the president of the UW system. And Cade died November 4th. We got a meeting with him in January, just a couple months later. And the Rockwells, which is Logan's parents, and I had a Zoom call with him, and we told them our boys' stories and about how UW Milwaukee did absolutely nothing to respond to Logan's death, and how if they had done some education and done some overdose awareness training, that Cade could possibly still be with us. And Tommy Thompson said, "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. This was not on our radar because, again, they were so focused on
Mm-hmm.
COVID protocols, and how many students in our UW system have died from COVID? None.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just think of all the resources they put towards that.
Yeah.
So Tommy Thompson he was resigning from his interim position at the end of March, and on I think like March 13th, he sent out a letter to all the chancellors, and we had asked him to mandate getting Narcan, which is the opioid
Mm-hmm.
reversal drug, in the dorms. We asked him to mandate it in education, and he sent out a letter, and he didn't mandate it, but he strongly encouraged the chancellors to all follow through on this policy to put Narcan rescue kits in the residence halls and to start the educational campaigns. And I'm so proud that now every single UW campus except for UW Superior has Narcan rescue kits in the residence halls. And they all have education happening now about opioids and fentanyl and signs of a drug overdose.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really big accomplishment to get that done. So my hope is, let me just tell a little bit more of the story about what happened with Cade that night. It was college night at Club Miramar on Oakland Avenue, and it's $20 for an all-you-can-drink wristband. And him and his friends all had fake IDs, so they were going out and they were pre-gaming in his friend's dorm room. And he said, "I want to get a perk, and I'm going to reach out to this guy that he knew." So I know then that Cade, they were in the bar across from Club Miramar that night, and this guy that he went to get the pill from showed up outside of the bar. Cade ran outside to meet him, and then they all went into the Club Miramar when it opened at 10 o'clock. And then I know he got kicked out of the bar at 10:36 because we went and talked to the bar owner, and the bouncer caught him with the pill, consuming it in the bathroom, and he was asked to leave. And so he rented a scooter, which I found out months later when I got into his emails and saw the receipt for that. So it was just so weird,
Oh
just like
gosh,
piecing
piecing.
together, like
Yeah.
I just visualizing what happened that night. So he took the scooter home, got back to his dorm, clocked in at 10:50, went and found a girl that he was friends with, and they have video of him, which I haven't seen, I've just heard about it, in the elevator together, where he tells her, he says, I took a perk and I feel yucky. And I guess in the video she puts her head back like, why did you do that? But she didn't know about fake pills and
Hmm.
she didn't know you could die from it. So they went back to his dorm room and he was in a suite and he went and laid down in a beanbag chair. And then the other boys like made the girl leave. They're like, well, he's like, I think they thought he drank too much and passed out.
Right.
So Kate's what they think is sleeping in the beanbag chair, and these other boys, it was a Wednesday night, they're like doing their homework on their computers with him behind them in the beanbag chair.
Yeah.
Because he died surrounded by people that could have saved him if they were educated and they knew what the signs of an overdose were. And I don't even like to use the word overdose. He was poisoned.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you die of a drug overdose, you take too much of something, of a known substance.
Mhm.
This was a poisoning. This is a drug induced homicide. So, so anyways, two of the boys went to bed. The other one was up, and when he was about to turn off the lights, he noticed that the way Cade was laying on the beanbag chair looked weird. So he looked closer and saw that his fingernails were turning blue and his lips were turning blue and his breathing was really shallow. But they still didn't know what was going on, and they took the time to Google search the symptoms. And then they were scared, and then they went and got the RA who was on the floor below.
Mhm.
So I just think all this time is
Yeah.
passing by. And so by the time 911 was called at 12:45 that night, and the police officers are on the first floor of Sandberg Hall where he lived, and they have Narcan on them. It was, right there. If the first girl would have known that you could die from one pill, this is what I think how this night could have gone down differently.
Mm-hmm.
If UW Milwaukee would have responded to Logan's death and said, we need to train our incoming freshmen on fake pills, we need to train them on overdose awareness and on how to administer Narcan.
Right.
And if the Narcan was in the dorms, this is what could have happened. Let's say Cade was still reckless and decided to take that pill. But same scenario, takes a scooter home, finds this girl, and says, I took a perk and feel yucky. And when she does this, Cade, she says, Cade, oh my gosh, you can die from taking one pill. I'm going to go get the Narcan and I'm going to sit with you and make sure you're okay.
Yeah.
And at the first sign of him nodding out, she could have called 911 and had the Narcan and administered it, and he would still be here. So that is the story I tell when I'm talking to lawmakers about the importance of having Narcan access, even in the high schools is what we're working on now too. In all schools, actually, we're trying to get this bill passed because the outcome could have been so different. And apparently, in about 60% of overdose or fentanyl poisoning cases, there's a bystander present. So it's so we need to educate. We
Yeah.
need to make sure that kids know that there's Good Samaritan laws and there's amnesty laws on campuses,
Right. Right.
and that
Exactly.
would you rather you do not have to be afraid about calling 911 because you're not going to get in trouble. They're not going to get in
Right.
trouble. And would you rather have them be alive,
Yeah. Right.
or would you rather wait and have them be dead?
Exactly. And you have to be so clear because these are all the things that come up, right? And the other thing is people who are confused about like, well, I don't know what's the problem. Should I try the Narcan or not? And if I do, is it going to hurt them? And it's not. If it's going to help, it's going to help. It's not going to hurt them. And I think that was something that I've heard a
Yes.
lot of people say. Wow, I feel educated enough to know that if I'm seeing something like that, even if I'm wrong, maybe they're passed out drunk, it's not going to hurt
It's not going to hurt them.
Exactly.
And I've done the Narcan training. They say you're supposed to rub the sternum,
Yep.
and that should wake anybody up. And if they do not awaken from that, that's when you use the Narcan. But at the training that I've been to, they actually administer the Narcan on a person, and all it does is stop the opioids from attaching to your opioid receptors in your brain. So if you did not take an opioid, it does absolutely nothing.
Okay.
So it is completely safe. If you give it to somebody, like you said, who did not take an opioid, it does absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a nasal spray. It's so easy to use.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's sad that we've come to a point where that, you have to, like, in high schools, that just, like, it hurts my heart, but, like, it's something that's so necessary and can save so many lives. I mean, again, it's unfortunate that we've come here, but we do need to address the problem, and we need to address it now, because one life is too many. One life is too many from something that's so purely preventable from, the things that, like, we harp on is awareness, and, like, Diane always says, you can't solve a problem you're not aware of.
mhm.
So I think about, those kids and how scared they must have been, but to have all of those tools, you're not going to get in trouble. This is safe to use. It's where it is. It's right downstairs. How to use it. That it even exists.
Right.
As an option. Or that he wasn't drunk. There were other signs. That could have indicated
Mm-hmm.
alcohol intoxication versus
Versus,
potential.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just such a powerful.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Well, and I just think about those poor kids too. Like they have to live with that. I mean, now the trauma for them of it having this happen is so horrific. And then one of Kate's best friends, who's at Milwaukee with him, she told me, she said, "Oh, I knew he had started doing that." And she said, "I told myself if I knew he did it again, I was going to tell you." And she didn't get the chance to. So she's dealing with a lot of trauma around that also. And so I think that is so important too. Like this fentanyl is in everything and it's so addictive, and people can't just stop on their own.
Right.
It's not like you can just say you shouldn't be doing that and they're like, "Oh, okay." No,
Yeah,
their
have
body
thought of that.
their
Yeah.
body needs
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
It's like needing a drink of water
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
us, or craving like sugar. Like I can go get a piece of chocolate anytime I want, and like
Yeah.
it's beyond that.
Yeah.
It's more like drinking water. So, anyways, I want to encourage people too that if you are a teen and you know somebody who is using, that do not be afraid to tell an adult and to call their parents and tell them, because your friend might be mad at you. But again, would you rather have them mad at you or would you rather have them be dead?
Well, and that's a conversation I've had with my daughters too, and you have to be very specific about it. Yeah, and it's like if it's a life and death, potential life and death situation, there's it's non-negotiable, and and explaining to your kids exactly what that all looks like. Okay, so if you were to tell me this is how we would handle it, because they worry about all these things. I know that there are kids that will get upset with another kid saying, "Oh, you're not invited to any more parties or whatever because you're going to go tell your parents."
Because narking is such
Such
a taboo in their
right.
culture, and it's like we got to change that.
Yeah,
because
you have to be strong enough to do the right thing to save your friend for the right reasons. And like you said, okay, so they're mad for a week or two, and then also, if there is such a thing where a friend's doing something, to let them know what you will do. Like if maybe it's in the past, if you do this again, I'm going to do this, and do it. So they know that you are serious. But yeah, I think that's another part that I've heard of. But are there any other? You were talking about rubbing the sternum. So if you were trying to talk to somebody about how they can recognize the difference, and again, we're saying you can still administer their Narcan and they'd be safe, but if it's alcohol or if it is an overdose, and are there any other
Well,
signs?
I think with the fentanyl poisoning or overdose, it's their lips and their fingertips can be turning blue, and the breathing gets really, really shallow and a light pulse. And then they're actually, and I didn't know about this, so I didn't ask the boys when I saw them when we went to go clear out Cade's dorm room. Is that there is a snoring sound that people make if they're having an overdose. And I didn't know about that when I saw these kids, and I was never going to go back and ask them that.
Yeah.
I didn't, they weren't like high school friends of his. So the snoring sound, I think, is a big one, and that's what happened with Logan when he passed away. He was on a FaceTime call with his girlfriend,
Oh.
and he started snoring, and she thought he just fell asleep and hung up the phone and never asked somebody to go check on him. So, um, yeah. So I'm assuming that happened with Cade also, and I don't know 100%.
Well, and you know that's the thing too is if the kids aren't themselves like have the wherewithal to even figure out if they're all drinking, and you know, so that's something too for people who are listening. It is important to stay in control enough to be even aware of what's going on with the people around you, and to be able to have the wherewithal to check them out and do all these
Mm-hmm.
things. And like in your case, I mean, um, they were right there, you know. So
They're right
like you
there.
said, it's all
Yeah.
back to the education. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the other thing is that mixing drinking with opioids is also so dangerous. And Cade was drinking that night, but it wasn't excessive. His blood alcohol level was a 0.12. So I asked the medical examiner, I said, was that a contributing factor? It is on his death certificate that there's ethanol also. But he said with how much fentanyl was in his system, that was enough to kill him without the alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that can slow your breathing down even more. So that is absolutely a contributing factor to these deaths as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's so tragic, you guys. The number of stories that I hear about these kids that are so young that this is happening to. You know, I'm on all these Facebook groups now, and there's so many, you know,
Yeah.
with 100,000 overdose deaths a year for the last 3 years. I'm on these Facebook groups with tens of thousands of parents that have lost their kids to fentanyl poisonings, and I mean, there's kids as young as 13 years old that are dying. There's a story of Dr. Laura Berman. She was one of Oprah's consultant doctors. During COVID, she thought her kids were safe underneath her roof.
Mm-hmm.
And her 16-year-old went on Snapchat, found someone to deliver to their house like a pizza. I think it was Percocet, what he thought was Percocet also. He, after they went to bed, ran out to meet the dealer out in the front yard, came back in, and they found him dead in the morning. So, I mean, there's no boundaries on this. These deaths are happening to people from all walks of life. You can be the best parents in the world from a nuclear family, and it's affecting everybody. So
Well, and I like, you know, what you were saying about obviously the education is so important because the kids are going to do what they're going to do, but if they at least are educated on all of it, they can make some decisions, right? To be aware ahead of time, or you know, all these things you're talking about, because it is hard as you're a parent when you're like, oh, don't do this and don't do, you know. So parenting, if you're telling your kid not to, explain the why behind it, explain the education.
yes.
I remember when I was in school, and I probably talked to you about this too, when I was younger, my mom was an ER nurse, and so she explained very emphatically, here's the problem. She didn't judge. She said, here's the problem with drugs, and she said, you know, the addiction. In her case, it was more the addiction that she was educating me on. But what I liked about the way my mom approached it was very non-judgmental. It was just very factual, and she just kind of told me it, you know. And I always remember that in the back of my head because, you know, when we're teenagers and in college or whatever, I know I did things that I'm glad I'm still around. You know, I mean, it's just we go through that period of our life that we want to, you know, take a step in the wild side a little bit.
Risk,
and you
taking
think
a risk.
you're invincible.
Invincible.
Like you absolutely, it doesn't even cross your mind that anything. I think it's something. Well, it's in disaster typically, but it's called like normalcy bias, where you put the worst case scenario out of your head because everything else in your life has been fine.
Right.
So it's kind of like why would this do anything to me?
Yes.
And I've been there. In college, and I told this story a while back when we were talking about personal darkness. But I did that. I was at a bar. I was in my early 20s. I was at a bar, and I was my friends were getting a little rowdier than I wanted, and I was kind of bored. And somebody at the bar picked up on that and said, "You don't look like you're having a lot of fun." handed me a white pill, and I went in the bathroom and did it. No idea what it was.
Right.
And
And
had that been today,
you could be dead
I
from that one pill.
very well could have been dead. And I had no idea what it was. I was just bored. I didn't care. My friends were being annoying. I wanted to party too.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so, I mean, it ended up being Molly or ecstasy or whatever, MDMA. Thankfully, and I say that now because it could very well have been fentanyl had it been today, and had this been such a prevalent problem back then as well.
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, and I've talked to so many people, and I was never a drug user, but like friends that are like, oh my gosh, I did cocaine in the 80s, and now it's being laced in cocaine. There's people dying every day from it in cocaine.
Yeah, well, and weed, that's the other thing.
Yes.
And the weed, yes.
That's really, really scary.
Right. I mean, and so many people, they think, weed is acceptable, and it's legal in a lot of states.
Yes.
And
so that
so
makes
it
it safe.
must be okay.
Yeah, even if it's on the street. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's,
And I
for
know
us
two
tugs,
parents in Madison who have lost their kids to fentanyl and marijuana.
Yeah.
And so what I've been telling the parents of kids that know their kids are doing weed is like, if they're going to do it, make sure they're getting it from a dispensary. And
so you know what it is.
yes, I have a friend in Illinois who's just like, I know this is at first she's like, yeah, but my daughter says it's like 3 times more expensive. I'm like, pay for the difference.
I mean,
Like,
and
Just
that's what's
so
hard,
worth a little bit of extra
Yes.
money to keep your life.
to keep your life.
Yes.
It's literally,
Right.
literally to keep your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you for doing this, but also for sharing that. And I did just want to ask too, just a little bit about if you could just share something about Cade that in his life that just made him such a light and such a bright spirit.
Yeah, well, he had an exuberant amount of energy from the very beginning. Every single parent-teacher conference starting in pre-K moving forward was, Cade has a lot of energy and he really likes to talk to his neighbors. So he always had that energy, always had to keep being reeled in. I remember saying to the teachers, like, as they were talking about how social he was, I'm like, I'm sure it's going to serve him really well as an adult.
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah.
But he just liked to talk a lot. And he would talk to anybody. He was so friendly, like with the clerks at the grocery store or at Target. He'd always like ask them how their day was going and just was such a social butterfly. And it was so wonderful hearing from his friends afterwards. Like there's so many things about your kids that you don't know when they're in high school because you see one side of them. And the number of stories I heard about how Cade was there for his friends and how they felt like they could talk to him about anything, and he always listened, and he truly wanted to help people. And actually, he came home the weekend before he died. Was Halloween weekend here in Madison, and he came home to work at my store. And he had told me he was meeting with his advisor, and he was switching his major to go into psychology so he can go to drug and alcohol counseling. So it's so heartbreaking that he doesn't get to do that. Yeah. And so, but anyways, he loved also like with this energy. One of the things that he did was he taught himself when he was about 13 how to do backflips.
Oh.
And
cool.
He never stopped. Like it was so cool. This kid would backflip off of anything. So he had just like this crazy risk-taking personality, like flips in the pools and off of cliffs and off of picnic tables and standing backflips. And it was just so fun to see him do this. Yeah. And then he loved skateboarding. He loved snowboarding. He was a wrestler in high school. He just was this really scrappy personality. But then he also dealt with some depression. And I think, like, talking to his friends, I'm like, why do you think he was using drugs? And they said probably he was self-medicating his depression. And it was never like I never thought it was that bad. Like, we had him going to counseling, and it was just never, like, suicidal. Sure. And I just kept saying, you've got to just come up with strategies on how to deal with this. You got to get enough exercise. You have to get enough sleep. You've got to eat right. But yeah, he chose apparently to self-medicate.
Just so common. Yeah.
And it's hard to admit, especially for somebody who's just typically so upbeat, to kind of face maybe having those issues and sharing that with people. Even like you said, his friends felt comfortable talking to him about everything, and he wanted to be. So he felt like, I'm the therapist friend, so I can't have these problems, so I can understand that. And certainly it is common, like Diane said, and just looking back and as a parent and seeing the signs and kind of again putting all the pieces together, it's like you have such a unique perspective to share, and obviously you share that with a lot of other parents. But, just something to continue pushing and normalizing for people. Since it's happening, it's not this secret underground society thing anymore. It's literally your next door neighbor,
Right. Yeah. And you know what? I actually want to go back to a thought that we were talking about earlier about normalizing and thinking that you're invincible is the importance of early prevention and early intervention on this, and making sure that kids understand the dangers of fentanyl when they're like 5th, 6th grade before they start using. Shortly after Cade passed, I went and spoke to the kids at Horizon High School, which is a recovery high school. And so I showed them this really great video that's called Dead on Arrival, and it's on YouTube if anyone wants to watch that. It's about the fentanyl crisis. And then I asked them, I said, what do you guys think about this? Is this a good video to prevent, kids from start using? And they said, well, yeah, but you have to show it to them before they start using. They said once you start using, because it hasn't happened to you yet, you think it's not going to happen. So because I used and I haven't died yet, so why would I die?
Exactly.
So that early prevention. I was at an event last night and I ran into Tom Farley, Chris Farley's brother, and he does a lot of work around prevention education also, and telling Chris's story. And he said, it's like the seatbelts. He's like, my kids just were taught from an early age that you always wear your seatbelt. You probably were taught that. We weren't. When we were in high school, like people weren't wearing seatbelts, and that came afterwards. So that was like a learning process. But like with our kids right now, it's just so ingrained. You just like don't get in the car without a seatbelt. And I think that's what we need to do about drug use. Is like at a young age, it's like you just don't do street drugs because it's so deadly. Like why would you ever want to do that? Just like not wearing your seatbelt could be very deadly.
Well, and repetition, at the age appropriate, way of delivery, so it's 5th and 6th grade, and then, maybe changing it to bring it more into something that means something to them as they get older, or because that's one thing that I've seen too. Like you said, if it's so far removed that they're like, well, I'll never do that,
Right.
But if they understand as they go through what it looks like to, what you might find yourself in a situation and how to handle it, and like if you're at a party drinking, and how you are not yourself, you're not thinking clearly, and how easy it could be to go ahead and be more open to taking that pill and having that plan in advance, all those things. But if it's that repetitive every year,
and and also part of some of the tragedies that are happening right now are people that are not even trying to use it as a party drug. These are people, there was 2 girls that died at Ohio State that were studying for final exams. One was pre-med. They both took what they thought was Adderall. Somebody could have just given that to them and said, here, take my Adderall. You do not know, unless it is prescribed to you, you do not know. There's another woman I met at a rally in Washington, D.C. Her daughter was a college student, didn't like things. She was taking some anti-anxiety medication, didn't like what she was on, went to a party that night, and somebody said, here, I've got the Xanax. Why don't you try this? And she died. She wasn't looking to get high. She was looking to reduce her anxiety.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I've heard of stories where, oh no, this is my mom's, Adderall or
that's so
Xanax or whatever it is, and so they trust the person.
Yes.
And that's the thing too. I think is you want to think you can trust the people, but you can't.
Those days are gone because you have absolutely no idea where it came from.
And even if it isn't, malicious intent, or even if it isn't, a laced sort of thing, it's just dangerous to take other people's drugs anyway, because the dosage could be different. They could have a different tolerance for certain things. Their doctor knows that. Their doctor doesn't know you. So I mean, it's just dangerous in general to
you don't
take
know
a pill that you don't know
allergic
from anybody for any reason.
Sensitivities or combining with one
interactions.
I mean,
and I've had parents of younger kids asking me, well, what do you think I can do to help for prevent this with my kids? And I said, coming back to the seatbelt thing, is I said I would start training them at a really young age to never take anything from anybody, not even a Tylenol or an Advil. If they have a headache at a sleepover, train them to call you,
Yeah.
and that you will come and bring it to them, and that they should never take anything unless it's from you or if it's prescribed to them.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like getting that ingrained. Oh, I don't take anything that's not prescribed to me. So, so I think that could be a really good early intervention too.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's good. As a parent of two boys who are, growing up in this kind of society that we've established here, it's good to learn things like that and know that there is a plan. And obviously, God willing, my kids make it to college and that age and stuff to have the wherewithal to understand that it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it.
It's not worth it.
You can be the square in the room, right? Have your friends razzing you about not doing it, but like even alcohol, because the amount of kids like alcohol intoxication or drunk driving who kill people and then they ruin their entire life for whatever dumb decision they make. It's just none of it is worth it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Yeah, the idea of not being in control, for me personally, has always scared me. It's especially if you know the people around you, you can't necessarily know that they're going to make the best decisions. And so I'm just kind of looking to see how we're doing on so the top a couple of questions, and then you've definitely covered so many good things here. And did you want to kind of close with that part of it? And how are we doing on time? Yeah, pretty good time.
You've got this down to a science. Like
You know what you're doing.
Your story is very powerful and very moving. And so I guess just what are some, if you could summarize kind of this, and what are 2 to 3 of the most important things you want our watchers or listeners to take home with them today?
Well, I think a huge problem in our society still is the stigma. And I think, there's so many things that happen that perpetuate it. And even at Cade's service, I got up and spoke, and I just said, forget stigma and forget shame. We're in a public health crisis here. And, a lot of times if somebody dies from a drug death, nobody wants to talk about it. And I was like, I'm bashing that. Like, I have no stigma and no shame in this. Like, I did everything I could to raise my son right, and they have free will to make choices, and he made a bad decision, but he shouldn't have died from it.
Yeah.
So, no, regardless of what it is, we have to stop treating addiction like a moral failing, and that it is a disease that happens, and your brain is not functioning right once you get that addiction. And there's so much judgment out there about people with drug use and preconceived notions that the people that are going to die from drug use are the junkie on the street. But you know what? That junkie on the street is still somebody's kid. And they don't want to be there. They got there by a matter of circumstances. So I want to eliminate judgment and look at people that are drug users more with compassion. Like, how did they get here? Like, they're not, nobody's choosing to be a drug addict. They got there for some reason. They had a hurt or something, or maybe they had an adventurous spirit and they just tried something and now they're hooked. So, so that's really important. And also, like, never say not my child. Like,
no kidding.
I mean, I never in a million years would have thought my kid would die from drug death. Never. And I know way better than that now, that can happen to anybody. And so, so if you're listening, you're like, this isn't going to be my kid. I don't need to talk to them about this. They could be the kid, the sweet mates, or the girl in the elevator. And they need to know about this so that they know how to save a life, because so that they're not dealing with a lifelong trauma of not knowing enough to save their friend. So those, I would say, are 2 really important things.
That's excellent. And it could happen to anybody. And I'm just going to say right here, I just had 3 I call them Irish triplets. I'll graduate from college in the last couple of years, and all of what you're saying is happening everywhere. Kids, like you said, the pre-med kids, the kids are all, it's not like you said, it's not just like the junkie on the street. And to your point, and this always makes me emotional, but every single person, like you said, they have their story. They have if you listen to their story and understand how they got to that point, you could see how, and you could put yourself in their shoes. You can understand, You know, a lot of them have gone through trauma. Some of our, you know, work in the human and sex trafficking realm. So many the people who've gone through trauma end up being addicted, and that's how they cope. And anybody who would put themselves in their shoes would quickly realize that this could happen to anybody. So,
yeah. Can I share a quick story? And then, so, you know, I knew by sharing Cade's story that we were saving lives. Like, I figured people would be making some different choices, but I actually had a young man tell me directly that Cade saved his life. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, did you hang out with him? And he said no. And he's like 25 years old, and Cade was 18 when he passed. And he said no. He said, and this is again from a family that you would never expect that this would be happening in, under preconceived notions. He said, I was addicted to Percocets, but it wasn't, you know, it was the street, it was fentanyl, so he was addicted to fentanyl. And he said, the day that Cade died, my mom came into my room and said, are you still using? And she told him what happened, and he asked her to go to the hospital. And he got on medically assisted treatment that day and has not used since. So it's so beautiful to have somebody tell me that directly that Cade saved his life, because I had been talking about how I know I'll see him again someday. And I have this vision that when I get reunited with him, he's going to be so excited to see me. He's going to be like, Mom, he's like, oh my gosh, good job. And he's going to say, I am going to show you all the lives that you saved by telling my story. And I so believe he is going to be able to sit me down, and we're going to look at this reel, and we're going to see the impact of what those people did with their lives because they made a different choice. And we'll have all of eternity to keep going over and be like, and then they did this, and then this happened. And I fully believe that that's going to happen.
He can show you all the new backflip.
Yeah, like I'm working on this.
Things that he's learned.
The triple Lindy.
Whole skate park.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh,
thank you.
You know, his death is not in vain, and and to your point, you know, he's going to share all the people that he's saved and you've saved, and you know, and that's the thing, on earth we don't know, but you know, someday, like you said, in heaven, when it will all be revealed. And it's just like that, I call it the spiderweb effect, right? And you know, and I know I've talked to lots of people. I've got some people who their kids have that same spirit, and we know, like we've talked about this too, it's just like you just want to make sure they're super, super careful. And some you know, so you're making such a difference, and you have no idea how many people have listened to your story already. And you know, so thank God for you, and for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I take every opportunity I can to tell Cade's story, because it still makes me feel connected to him.
Yes.
Which we'll do a whole nother podcast on.
I was just going to say, we're going to do another part 2 podcast. It'll be Matters of the Faith. And that one is one that we don't want to cut that short. So we're going to schedule that for another time. And I'm super excited about that one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. We will see you on the next one.
Thank you.